Welcome to the Mind Your Career webinar series. My name is Rachel Burkhan-Rommelfinger, and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Life After Success. Today's speaker is Dr. Jinnie Cristerna, who has a master's degree from the School of Social Administration. She is the High Achievers Therapist and founder of International High Achievers. But what you probably haven't heard about Dr. Jinnie is that she was a Taekwondo fighter and won gold, silver, and bronze medals in national and international competitions, as well as a sports psychological manager for the U.S. Taekwondo team. She has calmed down a bit and doesn't hit anyone anymore. It's my pleasure to hand the controls over to her for our wonderful webinar today.
Hey, thank you so much, Rachel. And I appreciate you letting people know I don't hit anyone anymore. That was a big thing that I had to grow out of after my last fight. But it was a natural thing. I don't go around popping people. So, and thank you and welcome to everybody today. I am, as you all know, super excited to be here. Anything that has to do with our lovely University of Chicago, I am always down for participating and sharing and growing together with my fellow brothers and sisters in spirit over at the university. Now, today you're going to notice a new format, and it's going to be a format that does not include a PowerPoint presentation or a video, but that is not by choice. I think that's more of a divine intervention, as technical difficulties have limited our ability to do anything outside of a call today. So I do apologize in advance for that, but I'm still going to impart some amazing information that you all can use. And of course, it's going to actually be practical, so that way you can play with it, tweak it, and make it your own. As Rachel said, we're still going to have those amazing live polls, and she's going to let me know what your poll responses are. So definitely make sure you have your pen and your paper and get ready for an amazing webinar today, where you're going to start thinking about your next steps after you become successful. And if you have already achieved success, you're definitely going to want to stay and take notes, because you're going to start to think about what your next steps could be if you choose to move into a different direction, and how to do that in a way that actually makes sense to you and honors your desires and your interests and curiosity. Okay, so let's get started. Now, I just want to tell you a little bit about the real purpose of this webinar. And that's really because a lot of the webinars that I do tend to be focused on how to get better at something, how to improve something, if you don't like something about yourself, and so on and so forth, right? So today, what I wanted to do is talk about, when you have achieved something, how can you take that and use that to build on and go even further? So we wanted to just switch it around a little bit and really talk about what life after success looks like, and how you can create a new life after success and really start to explore even more that space in between, if you will, the gray zone, right? So if you have not felt that you've achieved your success markers as of yet, that's okay. This is still a great webinar for you to participate in, because now you can start thinking about, well, what do I do moving forward? How do I actually make myself successful, so I can be in the position to create a life after this particular part of the successful journey, okay? So that's going to be really the motivator for me. And I'm going to share these things with you based on my experience. I know there's a lot of research out there on success, what that means, how that looks for different people. But I want to share with you what I've seen come up with my patients over the last, 27, almost 30 years, 3 decades. What has worked, what doesn't work so well, and then what's that space for you to play in where it's really that sweet spot and worth your time. So today what we're going to look at is, what does success mean? We're also going to look at what success looks like, because it's going to mean and look very different for everybody. Okay. How you know when it's time to move on. All right. Because some people don't know when it's time to move on, and they don't know, okay, should I move on? Should I do something different? Should I just stay where I am? Like, what does all of that mean? Like, what do I look for? So we're going to talk about that. And then last but not least, I'm going to share with you some resources that are effective, okay, in forging new pathways for yourself, because time is of the essence. And wasting a lot of time chasing after different, elixirs, if you will, or fatty type things are not going to do anything but maybe frustrate you. So I'm going to give you some guides or some suggestions on what may actually be helpful for you. Okay. So with that said, let me just kind of talk with you about who I am. And Rachel did an amazing job telling you a lot about who I am and what I do. And I am a clinical social worker. I do work with a lot of high achieving professionals. I work with their families. I work with their companies. I work with a lot of athletes, professional athletes, as well as high school and Olympians. So I do a lot of work around plowing through those mental roadblocks, dealing with those emotional blocks that might be getting them tripped up and not performing at their potential. So I do a lot of that kind of work with folks, and people will come from all over the world, and, they'll either fly through Chicago, because I'm known for people being able to come in, do 1 to 3 sessions, maybe it's some processes, and then they go back to their life. So no one's ever stuck in the office with me. So I think that in that way, I do honor people's time, just like we're going to honor your time today as well. So that's a little bit about me. Being a therapist for high achievers and their families and companies has been quite an experience, because I've learned something new with every patient. I've come to value how important your journey is, if you will, and how sacred that is for a lot of people. So to be able to witness people grow and struggle and grow even more has just been a blessing, at least for me. So I honor all of you being here today, and I can't wait to share some of this information with you as well. So the one thing I did want to mention that I didn't get a chance to mention earlier is that if you have questions throughout this webinar, go ahead and type them in the question box, even outside of the polls, because Rachel will just, do a pause for me and just tell me that there's a question that came in, and I can answer it for you, because I want this to be still as interactive as my webinars usually are with you guys. So don't hesitate to ask me any questions, all right? So let's jump into the first area, which is, what does success mean? And to be very candid, it's all relative, completely relative. Some people measure success by how much money they have. Some people measure success by either their social status or their professional status. And then you have others who measure it by their level of satisfaction with whatever it is that they're doing. Now, keep in mind that there are a lot of studies that link success to happiness in what you're doing, right? So those two, are pretty closely related. Now, I'm sure there's not a direct correlation in every instance, but for people who feel successful, it's usually tied to how happy they are with what they're doing and if it's satisfactory to them. So when we start to talk about success, I really want you all to start thinking about, well, how am I measuring success? Am I measuring it by how much money I have? And did I even give myself a dollar amount? And why do I need that particular dollar amount if you're going to be very quantitative about something, right? You want to ask, what's behind that number? Like, why did I pick that number? Because a lot of times people will pick a number and it's just arbitrary. And so when they achieve that number, it didn't bring them what they thought it would bring them. Okay, so that's really important first to be mindful of. The second thing that you want to look at is when you're thinking about status, like, what's the purpose behind needing that status, whether it's personally or professionally? Okay, so just really think about it. There's no right or wrong answers to it. This is just about you being clear on what your definition of success is. And with that, I want us to do our first poll question, Miss Rachel. And that is, how many of you know what success either looks like for you, or maybe you've defined it? And so, Rachel, I'm going to go ahead and let you kind of take the charge on that, since you have the buttons for those, and tell me what people pull up. And so remember, you guys, this is about you just kind of, did I think about what that means? Have I defined that? Do I know what it looks like? Or do I just know maybe I just think I know what it looks like, but I haven't put a lot of thought into it? Because we want everything to be a little more concrete today, or at least by the end of this webinar.
Great. Well, we've had a lot of answers. 87% of those who responded said yes, and
Yay!
13% said no.
Okay, so my 87%, it's not that you're my high achievers, it's just that you've thought this through, which is good. My 13%, that means that you can create anything you want. You can define success in any way you'd like, and that's a good thing. So remember, this isn't about right or wrong. This is about, okay, let me get really, really clear. Now, Rachel, before you take that poll down, can you all start typing into that questions box, that comments box that I was talking about earlier, and just say, you know what, how do you define success? Just type in, a sentence, maybe a word or two. Is it money? Is it status? Is it satisfaction? Like, how have you defined success out of those 87% of respondents? And just tell me what they say, Miss Rachel.
Status and satisfaction.
Ooh, status. So there's some interesting question marks in my head behind that status and satisfaction. So that's good. So at least people have started thinking about it. So let me ask this other question. Now, if you are sitting there and you're saying status, type it, for those people who said status, what kind of status, personal or professional? Now I'm just being nosy and curious.
We also have some who've answered wealth, or the meaning of life of service, a meaningful life of service.
Oh, beautiful.
For the status question, a couple answers of professional status. Professional respect.
Ah, okay.
Influence.
And so, and so for my philosophical folks out there who are looking to be satisfied, either by finding, meaning in their own lives, it's one of those things where it can be done. So I encourage everybody to continue to dig deeper and become clear on why. And don't ask yourself why, because why tends to make people defensive. But phrase it with how come? What is it about having that status or that respect, personally or professionally, or the wealth? What is that going to bring me? Okay, because even with my ultra wealthy clients, there are quite a few of them who are not happy and who don't feel that they are successful. Okay, so I really want all of us to learn from one another collectively so we can all grow together and help each other. So those were great responses, and it's definitely something that is going to percolate in my mind as I continue to work with my clients and my patients. So this is pretty exciting, Ms. Rachel. Thank you. So for those of you who don't have a sense of what success would look like for you, like I said, completely fine, because this next section that we're going to talk about, which is what does success look like, is going to be right up your alley, and it's going to give you a lot of material to work with. So if we start to look at what success looks like, and if you're wondering, well, what should I start to think about? What would it look like in the end, so that way I know I'm on the right path? Here's the thing. Success can look like anything you want, okay? Literally, it can be the accumulation of money. It could be a position within your company or within society. And it could be a sense of satisfaction. All right. So when you start to think about what success looks like, and you said money or position or meaning or satisfaction, you really want to start thinking more along the terms of specifics. Like if I wanted to do well, right? So say I said, $10 million. Like, okay, so what am I going to do with that $10 million? Like that's the reason a lot of my ultra wealthy clients or my wealthy clients are unhappy or they don't feel successful because there's no purpose behind the success or behind the goal or the benchmark. There has to be a purpose. So if you want a gazillion dollars just to have a gazillion dollars, right, but you're not going to do anything with it, you're just possessing something that doesn't necessarily give any meaning or any purpose to what you're trying to do, right? So it's just an end. It's just an end. Nothing can grow from it. It's just like having a pile of dirt or having a pile of seeds and they don't mix, right? The seeds don't grow into anything just because you have a whole pile of them, okay? And the dirt can't nurture or grow anything because nothing's planted in it. So if you start to look at success as being something that you would like to achieve for a specific purpose, whether it's for comfort, whether it's to help people, or whether it's to use your position even to help people or to influence people to help more people, or to use your position of influence to help encourage others or to motivate others. It could really be anything that you like. This is why so many people who have held the same type of position within a company, within a culture, within a society, they've been able to achieve various things. And sometimes none of them look alike because they're intending to do something very different with that particular type of goal. So as long as you have a purpose behind achieving that particular goal, right, then your ability to identify success and know what it looks like becomes crystal clear. Does that make sense to everybody? Type in yes or no, because I want to make sure you understand that one particular piece, because that needs to be as practical as possible. And let me know if people are following me, Miss Rachel.
We are getting some yeses.
Okay. So as long as people are following me, that's all I care about. If there's any question at this point about what I'm trying to convey, please just type in no and what you need me to clarify, and I'm happy to do that.
One person would like you to repeat the question.
Okay. So for me, it's what does success look like? I'm trying to make it practical because you have to have a goal, but you also have to have a reason for having that goal. Okay. So just having a goal of accumulating wealth or obtaining respect or power is not enough to achieve success. It's just a marker. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands you have to have a purpose behind the goal. Like, what's the reason you're trying to achieve this goal? There has to be a very clear and solid reason. And I just want to make sure everybody gets that. Was that helpful?
Yes, got it.
Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and go to our next question, Ms. Rachel. How many of you have already achieved success? Let's do that next poll question, because I want now you to think about, okay, have I achieved that if I feel like I've been successful? Did the purpose match up with the goal? And am I doing what I intended to do when I reached this goal? And tell me what they say, Ms. Rachel.
Our answers are coming in. And they've been, okay, it says 60% are saying yes, 40% are saying no.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the final. So 56 yes, 44% no. So it's very split.
Okay. And so this is not uncommon because people who say they've already, they know what it looks like, right? And, they know what it feels like. So when we start to ask, well, have you achieved it, right? Have you started to achieve that success, or have you achieved it already? A lot of people will say, yeah, I've achieved it. And it's usually if they're at the end of their career, or as they shift into another chapter in their life, people will say, yeah, I think I've achieved that goal. And other people we'll see as they're starting to peak, they'll say, no, not just yet. So that sounds about right, because, and it depends, of course, the demographics of our audience. But for those of you who know what success looks like, or you've defined it and you've achieved it, the question really becomes, okay, now let's take a look back and reflect on, how did I achieve that? Let me make sure I dot my I's and I cross my T's, because I want to make sure I get the most out of my efforts in achieving these goals. Because when I do get ready to shift and move on to the next chapter of my life, I want to be able to look back and go, yep, I did that, so I can move forward fully present, not regretting anything. For those of you who know what success looks like, you've defined it, but you haven't achieved it yet, as you're achieving this, now you can be more conscious and present and grounded as you're going through this space and saying, okay, this is part of my purpose too. This is tying nicely into the reason I'm working so hard, because I want this achievement or this goal to really mean something to me when I'm done with it. I don't want to go back and scramble and try to fix and clean up some things because I missed the boat on X, Y, or Z. Okay? So this is not a bad thing if you have not achieved success. It gives you more clarity as you're going through this. And if you have achieved success, go ahead and just make sure you've done what you really wanted to do. So as we shift and you move into that next space, you're fully present and you don't have any regret when you look back. Okay.
We've had a couple responses to what you've been saying, Jinnie. We had one person who was like, but I don't really know what my goals are because I'm happy with my life. And someone else just said they were just telling us their goals, which were financial independence and 2 orphan kids, one who's a U Chicago grad, and a meaningful career serving others.
Okay. So let's take the first one. Let's do that. What's the first one again? I don't know what my goals are.
I don't really know what my goal was in answering this question because I'm happy with my life.
Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being content. Here is the rub, right? Because we ebb and flow in our life. We know it's not going to stay this way. We're going to get challenged, not because we're ungrateful or undeserving, because when people will go, oh, why did everything just stop? You know, because I remember there were moments when I had that happen. You know, did I do something wrong? Just enjoy that moment, right? It's not that you need to have a goal all the time in life. I mean, that's just kind of unhelpful. I mean, people want to enjoy themselves. It's just, okay, well, now that you're happy, this is the perfect time to think about, wow, my life is good. And if I could choose to do anything because I would love to do it, I'm interested or I'm curious about it, I would love it to be X, Y, or Z. Does that make sense? Okay, so for those of you who might feel like, okay, perfect. So, because I want to make sure that people walk away knowing, not just feeling, but knowing that just because you're happy now doesn't mean that you don't have a goal. It just means now you are in the perfect, or what we call the sweet spot, the ideal situation. You've hit the lottery, meaning that now you can choose without distraction what you would love to do more of, or what you're curious about, because that moment is not going to last forever, because we're here to grow, right? Now you get to choose how you might want to be happy and be challenged in the next chapter when it's time for you to grow and move on. Doesn't mean you won't be happy in that one either. It just means, okay, now I'm going to try this out. Okay. What was the next question, April?
That was just someone wanting to share with us their goals, that they've already reached, you know, financial independence, having 2 great kids, and a meaningful career serving others.
Okay, so if you've achieved that goal, now you're going to be ready for the next section. It will be coming up actually in 2 sections now that I'm thinking about it. I want to ask the question, for those of you who said you've achieved your goals, let's put that next poll question up, Miss Rachel. How many of you knew when it was time to move on? Did you know when it was time to move on? Or are you still hanging out in that same spot where you go, oh, I've achieved my goals. I'm just going to hang out here. I'm not going to do much else.
Right now we have 100% yes.
Really? Everybody moved on. Well, let's see, because I am curious after I share like this next section, what people think about having moved on. Because
the question was, Jinnie, the third question was, did you get stuck when you achieved your goal?
Oh, that's right. Okay, because I have technical difficulties and I can't see your screen. Okay, well, that's a good question to have. So did you get stuck? Oh, that's right. How many of you achieved success and got stuck at what do I do now? So 100% of people said they have.
But perhaps we should ask them the other question.
Well, they've answered this one, so I can go back, and this is what happens, when I'm not in front of a computer. So yeah, so let's do that one. So 100% of the people said that they got stuck at what now after they achieved their success.
Yes, that's right. And actually, the other question is up for them, and it's more split on how did they know when to move on. So if that's helpful.
Oh, okay. I was going to say that one was okay.
For them knowing when to move on, and 67% were no.
Oh, now that sounds more right, because when you said 100%, I was like, oh my God, this is not generalizable to the population. Okay, so let's do the first one first. When people get stuck, this is what happens. So the reason I'm so happy the one participant added in their comment of, yeah, this is, I'm happy, so what do I do? What ends up happening is you'll get stuck there and you won't move on. You won't know when to move on. And that can happen sometimes. The other piece is, okay, well, I've gotten successful and I'm happy. I've achieved my goal, right? I am scared to move on. I kind of want to, but I don't know what to do. So I don't think I'm going to do anything. I'm just going to kind of sit here. So they're both the same outcome, but one is a little different. Okay. One is, I'm happy. There's really no reason. I'm content. I'm comfortable. The other is, I struggled. I really pushed through. I faced some challenges and I don't know what to do next. I'm kind of at this, oh my God, I'm done. Right. And I'm scared because I don't want to create a new problem for myself. And I think that's what happens with most folks. So when that happens, you really want to start to look at, okay, well, what would I love to do? What am I interested in doing? Even if you wouldn't love to do it, but I'm just curious about it. Pottery, law, medicine, whatever. Okay, it could be anything you want. You want to go back to that, anything I want. Because if you've achieved success in one area, you will absolutely achieve success in another. It'll have a different journey. It'll have a different couple of twists and turns, but you'll be able to do it because you are resilient. You've already built it up. Okay, so what you want to start to do is look at that. Now, for those people who answered the other question, how many of you knew when it was time to move on, and 66% said no, that's the reason why. Because you're not looking at it perhaps from the perspective of, okay, what would I be curious in doing? What am I interested in doing? What would I like to explore? Even if I don't do it so well. Because one of the setups for us not moving on and finding something new to do has a lot to do with, I don't want to fail. I don't want it to be hard. I don't want to do this again. I mean, if that journey to your success right now was tough, some people are like, I don't want to struggle. I don't want to create a new problem for myself. So that's based in fear. All right. So if you're having a tough time moving on, then guess what happens to your perception of achieving success? You start to feel like there's nothing after that. And you'll stay in that same position. Say if you're at work, we'll use that as an example. You'll stay in that same position at work, and guess what? Your quality of work declines. You become bored. You start to create problems because you're bored. It's kind of like the kid who's in school in class and they're so bored they start messing with everyone and creating chaos, right? Or starting to bring in negativity. And so all of the good deeds that you did, all of your light starts to dim because now you're just pessimistic because you shouldn't be there anymore. It's time to move on. All right. So that's the reason I asked that question, is because you want to know what's going to be on the other side of it, because that needs to motivate you. You don't want to be in that place to be motivated. You need to know that if I don't choose, a choice is going to be made for me, and I'm probably not going to like that choice. Does that make sense? And let me know, just type in that box if you have any questions about what I just shared.
There is a question. I'm not sure it's entirely about what you just shared, maybe a tangential. Someone says, I tend to get hung up on a sort of Zeno's paradox of achievement, where each step closer to my goal yields diminished returns. I guess my question is, when do I accept a B+?
Oh, that's a good question. And the answer to that has more to do with the fact that, let me rephrase this. The answer to that has more to do with your expectations. Are you realistic? Because you're not going to get an A in everything. Okay? If you expect to get an A in everything, you will never pass the class. Now, that doesn't mean that your goal should be a C. The goal should be to do your very best. And whatever that is, that should be an A. If that was your best, that was an A. And this is what a lot of my patients have learned over the last nearly 3 decades with me. Whatever you didn't learn in one area, it always pops up in the next. So if you did a good enough job and that was really the best you could do, move on. You'll learn it in a different area because it may not be the best area for you to learn that lesson. You might not learn some really advanced formula in calculus. You may learn it in another math class. You may learn it in programming. You may learn it in medical school or whatever. You may get it and go, oh, that's why it's blah, 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 blah. So a lot of times when we're trying to be successful, we're making it so linear that we take the dynamic part of learning and the dynamic part of life out of the equation. Things are not going to go very smoothly as you're heading down the road to success. So if you're getting blocked and you can't move forward in any direction, what that means is you need to turn around and look back and go, wait a minute, I missed something. And that happens with athletes all the time. That happens with my quants all the time. Anybody that's really left brain and they're dealing in like the numbers or physics or anything like that, that happens quite a bit because they're trying to push forward without having gathered all of the information or the data from learning, right? Everything isn't left brain. Everything isn't about checking off a box. Sometimes you can't move forward because you have forgotten a part of who you are and the reason why you're doing this work, or the reason you've set this goal for yourself. Okay? So if you're just accumulating wealth just to accumulate wealth, which a lot of people have, they'll get stuck. They'll get stuck at every promotion. They'll get overlooked sometimes because they're not trying to get promoted to help the company. They're trying to get promoted to help themselves. They're not really thinking about the company. So until you get clear on why am I looking for X, Y, and Z to be my goal, that can limit you as well. I'm not saying that's the case for you, dear. I'm just simply saying it's something to think about because you want to go back and get as much data and information as possible. So as you move forward, you're moving forward more present, more grounded, more aware. And sometimes you're not going to learn it in that time. You need to go and do something different. You might have to switch. And you might have to switch and do something you might not necessarily want to do at that moment, but you have to do. Because remember, there's a saying that we have with executives and with kind of smart people in general that tend to be a little savant-like. And that saying is, successful people, like anybody can do things that they want to do. Successful people do things that need to be done, but they might not necessarily like to do. That all comes with success. So maybe looking also at some of those things that you don't really want to do and prefer not doing to see if there's something there. Okay? Was that helpful? Okay. Well, let's
We
go
have a
ahead
yes.
and move. Oh, okay. Perfect. So the next question, the next poll question I think we had was, how many of you did not move on? I know some people knew it was time to move on. So which poll question are we at right now?
We've done how many of you knew when it was time? How many of you got stuck? Our next one would be how many of you knew it was time to move on and how many of you did? Are you ready to run that question?
Yeah, let's see how many of them did. Because I know it's kind of similar to the last one, but because we're kind of going, I'm shooting in the dark here, guys. So let's see what people say to that question. It might have been that 1/3%.
They're still answering.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard to move on. It's tough.
So we're at exactly 50 yes and 50 no.
Okay. And for those of you who said yes, my guess is when it was time for you to move on, you moved on with grace and ease because you were satisfied and there was some meaning behind that satisfaction and you felt that you were done and you got closure. Some of you were probably like, okay, I'm excited, not necessarily displeased or fully satisfied, but I'm looking forward to the next thing. And some of you may have kind of been escorted out with a lot of support and love and ease. Those of you who did not move on, it's not uncommon when you don't move on to grieve. And we don't want to feel the sadness because we're feeling so good. So in achieving a life goal or being successful at something we really enjoyed before, that's kind of like a death in some way, right? Because our identity is tied into that. It's like, well, who am I now? And so that makes it hard for us to move on as well. But if you're able to realize that's just a part of who you are, right? It allows you to become aware of all the other things that you can be and that you can do in this lifetime. And it then kind of fuels you back up with excitement and looking forward to things happening and looking forward to new opportunities and experiences. Because you know that it doesn't take away from who you used to be and what you used to do. It adds to that. You're starting to develop some breadth and some depth to your identity and to who you are. So that's really important to know. So for the half of you who are still kind of struggling with that, it's okay. You know, a lot of times that comes up. It can last as short or as long as you'd like, to be very candid with you. If you can go in and work with somebody and process that, it usually goes away within 1 or 2 sessions, and then you're excited and you move on with your life. So it's not as big of a deal as a lot of us make it out to be when we, you know, have come to the end of a chapter of our life. All right? So let's move on to the next piece, which is, how do you know when it's time to move on or begin to explore new interests, or even both, right? I know we asked the question, but now let's get into it a little more deeply, right? So when you start to notice that you're checking off all these boxes, whether you get a B plus, an A, C plus, B minus, doesn't really matter. When you start achieving measurable goals, right, when you're still curious and you're satisfied, that's when it's time to move on. Now, here's the rub. A lot of you will not move on. That's okay. Some of you might call it being strong-willed or stubborn or whatever the case is. It's no good or bad to it. But some of you will not move on despite having achieved your goal for whatever the reason. Here's where I say you can either move on to something new, you can explore new interests, or both, right? So if you go on to something new, right, you're leaving this completely behind. If you're exploring new interests, you're saying, I'm curious about something else over here. I'm curious about this thing over there. And I'm just going to, play with that a little bit. Or you can do both. And this is where a lot of people end up transitioning. All right, because this is kind of that transition between letting go of who they used to be or what they used to do, or letting go of that success slowly. Because a lot of times we have to transition out and move on. Okay, and what that means is, say for example, you're doing something in medicine, and it's like, I just love medicine. I don't want to do anything but medicine because that's just what I love. Well, this is a perfect opportunity for you to say, let me expand my concepts, my notions, my ideas. Let me see where I can contribute and really push the envelope in my field, right? How can I start to make meaningful contributions and expand ideas and thoughts and applications of what we're already doing, right? So it's not so much that you're staying stuck where you are, and it's not so much that you're completely moving on. You're kind of staying in the same space, but now you're venturing into other areas within that field. So it's very possible to do that, okay? And sometimes people will stay where they are because they're really good at it. They love it. They're happy, kind of like somebody said earlier. And what they do is, if I'm going to be, for example, I stay home with my kids sometimes for months at a time and see patients out of my home because it's summer, for example. Well, I do other things with them, or I start to do other stuff with my patients or things like that. So I'm expanding. I'm doing a little bit of both, right? So this is a really great time for you to play and for you to explore and for you to say, oh, I'm going to add this to my repertoire of things to do, right? And then when things shift and your time frees up, maybe you'll add something else to it. So attorneys are one of my favorite clients because what they do is, they will get to a point in their career. Sometimes if they're litigators, they'll move on to overseeing things and managing new attorneys or what have you, because they don't litigate much. They're very successful. Nobody wants to go to court with them. So then they start to do other stuff. Maybe they work out. Maybe they do some yoga. Maybe they do, Ironman or whatever, just to kind of keep themselves busy in a different way and work a different part of, and grow a different part of who they are. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're still litigators. They're still working in the law firm, right? Same thing with doctors. So you can do both and start to expand your mind and your thinking in your profession or your career. So that's what I mean by being able to do both or move on. So again, being able to know what you're going to do next means, well, what am I curious about? What would I love to explore? Even if it's for a short amount of time, it doesn't mean you have to be married to it, okay? So with that said, because I know I want to be mindful of our time, I want us to just have a little bit of have a small conversation around resources that are effective in helping people forge new paths when they're ready. And before I do that, I want to make sure there's no questions around what we've talked about up until this point. And Rachel, just let me know if anyone has any questions in the box that they typed into.
Yeah, there was a question about in knowing what to do next, what are the signs? What signs are noise and which are signs to follow that can help me direct what I should do next with my life?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. So usually when you get bored, that's always a sign. Always, always, always a sign. When you're getting bored and you're not challenged, which of course, ironically, is the reason why a lot of people leave their jobs, right? So when you get bored, you're not growing, you're not doing anything new, you're not contributing to your field or to the world that you've decided to be in, it's definitely time to go. That's the biggest red flag ever. And that doesn't mean it's time to go and leave that company. It may be time to add something to it. And if you're being cut off and say the company doesn't want to do that, then it may be time to look for a new company if that resonates with you. So that would be one sign. Another sign is everybody else around you is growing and moving on, right? So be mindful that, I know we at U Chicago like, the rigorous challenge of debate and thinking, but we also want to be well-rounded people. So you want to remember that the world is a reflection of you, right? If everyone else has moved on with their lives and they're exploring things and they're traveling or whatever, and you're doing the same thing and you're kind of complacent in it, that could be a mirror back to you to go, wait a minute, when was the last time I did anything new? When was the last time I kind of put myself out there and did something a little adventurous, right? So remember, what you see happening around you is a mirror of you, good and bad. We don't get to pick and choose, right? So if you feel like you're surrounded by toxicity, then it's like, okay, well, one, should I stay in that toxic environment? But two, how am I contributing to that? Am I trying to counter that in some way? Am I bringing the best parts of me into this environment or into this organization? So you want to start to look at you and how you're growing. So if you're looking to see what the signals are, always know that it comes back to you. Are you moving? And it doesn't always have to be vertical. It doesn't always have to be horizontal. And sometimes, more often than not, it's going to look zigzaggy. And that's okay, as long as you're moving, as long as you're out there and you're present and you're trying new things. But when you see those signs that make you pause and stop because something is wrong, that's when you need to take an inventory and look at, wait, is this where I want to be? So I hope that was helpful.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay, cool. Any other questions? Okay. All right, so let's talk about the resources that are effective in forging new paths. Now, I'm going to tell you some resources that are completely free and effective, so I encourage everybody to go with whatever resonates with you. Some of them you'll do some private work, which some people, I've noticed more people at U Chicago tend to gravitate towards. But there are also some resources that are just as effective for certain things that really help get the gas going. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is point out career services, and that's not because they're hosting this program. It really is because they have a lot of resources there. They have resume reviews that are free. They just offer a lot of services that will help you to start thinking about things, starting to plant seeds long before you even need them, right? So you don't want to wait to be in a crisis to use them. You want to be ready so everything feels fluid, feels natural, feels like a progression of things, right? So first and foremost, look at the University of Chicago. I mean, the honest to God's truth is you paid a lot of money to go there. It's one of the most elite universities in the world. Use that resource, okay? Use your network. Talk with people. Either mentor or be mentored, right? And if that mentor is younger than you, then that's even more awesome because they're going to teach you some stuff that you definitely don't know. And if they're older than you, that's great too because they're going to drop pearls of wisdom that allow you to really integrate at a higher level, and that can actually help you to kind of dig a lot deeper and see, oh, okay, well, maybe I didn't think about this. Let me play with that, right? Because they've been there, done that. So mentoring, being mentored, really, really good. Usually doesn't cost you anything. Volunteering, right? So for those of you who are philosophical and they're looking to have more of that meaning, or you're trying to get into that space and just find the purpose behind it, volunteering is great. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be at a shelter or some type of social service agency, although I think those are good for the soul. You can volunteer at some corporate America organizations. You know, they have it where you can come in from time to time and just kind of help out with certain things, and, you know, whether it's filing and just kind of being around and available. That doesn't cost you anything, and it exposes you to a whole world that you might be curious about. Usually after then, you'll decide whether or not you really are curious about it, and go and audit some classes. Take some classes at Booth or wherever you are in the world, and just audit. You're not taking it for a grade. Just kind of sit there and just kind of follow along, right? And then, of course, there's coaching programs that we have amazing coaches at the University of Chicago, and there's a coaching page and resource that Career Services has where you can find all kinds of coaches who have expertise in different things, right? A lot of them offer a free session if you're an alum. So, you know, let them know and see if there's any special offers. Some of them don't, which is fine too, right? And then the other piece may be therapy. And I always bring up therapy because most of my successful clients have me on speed dial. They don't use me all the time. I might talk to them once a year, a few times a year. But it's really because if they're going through something emotional, they don't want to do it alone because they can get stuck there. And that's not because there's anything special or not about them. It's just because we're human. We get stuck in emotions, especially if they're negative emotions like grief or sadness or anger, right? Or revenge or confusion. So those are all of the resources that I think are available that are helpful, but always start with your career services, especially at the University of Chicago. I don't say that about every school, and I do these webinars for lots of schools, but I know U of C has a lot of resources. They're very, very top-notch, high quality, so I suggest that you start there and then decide if you're going to go into some private resources. You'll be able to make a better choice in that place. So with that said, I think I just made it right under 12:55, Miss Rachel. Did I miss anything?
No, that seems great. I guess if there's any final questions, this is your moment. For those listening in. Great. Well, Jinnie, we're so thankful to you for being with us today and offering this webinar. So I just want to thank you again for sharing with us about success and helping us explore how we define that for ourselves, how we find purpose, and what we should do once we realize we have been successful in one area of our life and how to help ourselves to move on. So thank you, everybody, for attending this webinar. You can join us tomorrow to hear from Alderman Amaya Pawar, who serves here in Chicago. Also, you can come back next week for the webinar, Bouncing Back, 10 Ways to Build Resilience. Hope you'll join us again for other engaging content. Take care and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.